In this year's presidential election, it looks like anything can happen. Democrat Hillary Clinton and Republican Donald Trump are two of the most unpopular major party candidates in history. That has many people looking for alternatives, and the leading alternative ticket is the Libertarian Party, with former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson averaging around 9% in polls. His running mate is Bill Weld, the former Republican governor of mostly Democratic Massachusetts for much of the 1990s. He is now the Libertarian vice presidential nominee. Welcome, Governor Weld.
Thanks so much.
So how exactly did you become a Libertarian? Did you change, or did the Libertarian Party change?
I didn't change. I've self-identified as a Libertarian since I was in law school reading Friedrich Hayek, The Constitution of Liberty and the Road to Serfdom. I knew Gary Johnson back when we were governors together. My second term was his first term. So we were members of a kind of mutual admiration society even then. And when he called me this year and said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think this idea has a lot to recommend it. I actually have quite a bad character, and I enjoy exactly the sort of thing we're doing now, the back and forth, the positioning, the three-dimensional chess game, et cetera."
You actually said that you recently played chess with Gary Johnson.
It was
so you guys are more than running partners?
It's a very unfortunate result, a clerical error.
What happened?
I did not prevail.
So what issue got you into this race? When he called you, what is it that you are most invested in changing?
My biggest issue is the budget, the deficit, and spending. My slogan when I was in office was, "There's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money." And people, particularly in Washington, think that when they print money, it's free. Now, some people in Washington think everything is free, but it's not. Taxpayers are paying for it, and at the end of the day, it's not even just the taxpayers. I mean, we will wind up hollowing out our economy if the national debt continues to climb, and that will penalize us in terms of jobs and the international economy.
So you're concerned about the national debt?
I am. It'll be $20 trillion when President Obama leaves office. Half of that will be his. That's unsustainable. And I do think that if Mrs. Clinton, does everything she says she's going to do, it's going to continue in the same direction.
Let's talk about Hillary Clinton. I mean, you've known Hillary and Bill Clinton for a long time, for decades. You were nominated by Bill Clinton to be an ambassador. Why run against her? Why shouldn't she be president?
Well, anybody has a right to run for president or vice president of the United States, and I would never tell someone else not to, nor would I suffer someone else to tell me not to, particularly when, I've got a guy that I really trust, Gary Johnson. I call him Honest Johnson because he is, if anything, painfully honest. And I agree with his politics. The two of us are fiscally responsible, or conservative, if you will, and socially tolerant, inclusive, liberal, if you will. And one of the points we have to make in the debates is that we're the only party that represents those things. The Republicans, nobody would confuse them with being socially welcoming. I mean, they made a point of making their platform even meaner in Cleveland than it was before, towards gays and minorities, and just very bad tone. And nobody would confuse today's Democratic Party in the U.S. with being a party of fiscal restraint, sobriety, or responsibility.
So what makes you most nervous about a President Hillary Clinton?
Well, I guess that would be the main issue, fiscal policy, just a difference in view there. As you say, I've known her for a long time, personally and favorably, so this is not, I'm not throwing epithets around the way Mr. Trump does, except for Honest Johnson. That's one I hope will stick.
That's right. You hope to take that one all the way. What about a Trump presidency? What scares you the most?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that Donald seems very invested in doing the homework that he has to do to understand, for example, free trade and the global economy. He sees an opportunity to score points with a few people who are not keen about free trade, but it's a short-sighted view. And I'm going to impose all these massive tariffs on the Chinese because that will threaten them and bully them, and they'll have to do what I want. I almost think he thinks he can go with them and say, you're holding X trillion dollars of our debt, we're going to renegotiate it. Yeah, because that's his style. But the problem with that is it's unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment says the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. And there are other clauses in the Constitution that I also don't think Mr. Trump has read.
At the Republican convention, there was somebody that offered to lend him a constitution. Trump has had some stumbles along the way. Even he said now that he has regretted times that he has said different things. Do you think we're seeing a different Donald Trump and that he will be able to sway more Republicans to his side?
I'm not so sure. I actually held up a constitution at a much earlier speech at the National Press Club and said my advice to Mr. Trump is tomorrow, instead of reading The Art of the Deal for the 400th time to yourself, read this, the Constitution, for the first time. I actually don't know why anyone who's a Republican would vote for Donald Trump. I mean, in a way, what he said at the beginning is true. He's a New York liberal. And he does not have positions that I associate with the traditional Republican Party, smaller government, responsible stewardship. No, he's, swinging for the fences somewhat wildly. So I don't see it.
Let's get to some of the issues. I want to talk about Obamacare. Are you for repealing it?
I'm for a much more competition in the marketplace. I'm not sure I'd start out with repeal. I've always been in favor of the health savings accounts across a number of industries. I think we need to have doctors and patients making more of the decisions in our healthcare system instead of the government and the insurance companies. That's maybe the worst thing about Obamacare is your decision makers are the government and insurance companies, neither one of whom has an incentive to maximize the quality of care. I mean, at the end of the day, we have two items here. One is the quality of care, and the other is cost and cutting costs. And I understand that if you want to cut costs, you've got to get more people in the system. So I always supported the mandatory feature there, unlike most Republicans, because I know that if you don't do that, you're not going to get the 28-year-old bartender who's making $125,000 a year into the system. And he'll not insure, and then when he breaks his leg skiing at Sugarbush, he'll show up at the emergency room. But quality of care is perhaps even more important, and I think we too often lose sight of that.
With Obamacare, you've gotten the bartender now, for the most part, getting in, right. But you've also gotten people with pre-existing conditions that have come into the marketplace. And when people think about libertarians, they think of them loving the free market. So allowing pre-existing conditions, which is something that's been shown to be popular, it kind of distorts the free market for healthcare.
It's popular, but it's expensive.
So is that something that you would get rid of?
That'd be a tough one politically, but I do take your point.
So it seems like still under review?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the major party candidates which are against TPP. Why do you think that we need free trade?
We need free trade because the U.S. has by far the highest productivity per worker of anybody in the world, so we're always going to be net winners in free trade. P.S. The jobs that we get from free trade are going to be high-wage jobs. It is true that sometimes, lower wage trading partners can get some low wage jobs, but the answer to that isn't to scrap the free trade agreements, it's to make provision for the workers in the US who get the brunt of that. More aggressive retraining and resettlement policies. In Appalachia now they're trying to retool what industries dominate in places like Kentucky. They're trying to bring in environmental industries.
Instead of working in coal, try and retrain.
Web industries of the spirit of entrepreneurialism.
Why don't people seem to be buying the idea that free trade is good for America? If both major parties are saying that they're not supporting it, it seems to be polling well for them. What is it that the electorate is missing?
Well, free trade historically has been very much in the interest of the United States and undergirded the stable world order since World War II and has done us an untold amount of good. I think both the major party candidates are saying they're against it just for political reasons. And Mr. Trump has made a lot of noise about it and said the Mexicans are killing us, the Chinese are killing us. You know, if you looked at even his foreign policy speech, it just consisted of him picking out foreign nation after foreign nation, saying they're responsible for all our problems. That's pure demagoguery. He's just aiming at a group that he correctly thought would come out and vote for him in the Republican primaries, who were people who were angry at their position in the national economy, and rightly so.
You brought up good jobs. And right now we have actually incredibly low unemployment, but wages have been stagnant. Our productivity gains haven't been huge. How do we create more good jobs with the emphasis on good? I mean, realistically, beyond the free trade jobs, how does it happen?
Free trade is part of my answer there. I also think if you can encourage industries to grow, this may not be direct government intervention, but just organize society in such a way that industries that are high-wage industries, such as software, biotech, telecom, that they grow. And we did that in Massachusetts. Matter of fact, even I make so bold as to say I did it. And I wanted to make it so that if you were a biotech company and you didn't have an office in Kendall Square, Cambridge, you weren't competitive because you were not in the cluster of your competitors. And we made that sale. And by the end of my first term, if you were a biotech company in North Carolina or Illinois or New Jersey, where our competition was, you had to also have an office in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the result was, in my first term, Massachusetts went from being the highest unemployment rate of the then 11 industrialized states to the lowest.
Biotech stocks have helped push the NASDAQ to a new record high this week.
We had the trifecta not so many
exactly.
days ago.
We've had two of those this month. So unemployment's low. We have housing largely recovered since the financial crisis. Stock market at all-time highs. And here we sit with emergency low interest rates. Do you have any feeling that the Fed has moved too slow here? Are you guys concentrating at all or talking about the Federal Reserve and what they can do to help this economy?
Well, I have that feeling. I think it's the wrong thing for a libertarian to say, and I haven't discussed it with Gary, but I do have a little bit of that feeling. I will say more broadly that Gary and I don't think things are terrible. We think America is pretty great right now. And maybe if people could stop screaming and, crying bloody murder and saying the U.S. is just such an awful place. I travel around the world a lot on business the last 10 years plus. We are the envy of the world. And one of the reasons we're the envy of the world is we have rule of law. That's something that Mr. Trump shows very little interest in. He wants to rip up all our treaties. He says we can't be members of organizations like the World Trade Organization. Well, we've complained to the WTO twice about Chinese subsidizing their exports, and the United States won both those cases and China lost. So again, it's a question of more homework to be done.
Gary Johnson has said that you two have no chance of winning if you're not in the debates.
I think that's true. I also think the flip side is true, that let's say in the second week in September it's announced, yeah, you are going to be in the debates, either because you hit 15 or some combination of tests is imposed or for whatever reason. From that day on, we will have saturation national media coverage of our campaign. Only 30% of the people know who Gary is right now. And we're polling at 13%, 12% favorable, in other words, selected. And that's only when that's the second question asked. If it were asked as a top-line question, who you for, Clinton, Johnson, or Trump, we'd be over 20% right now. And when 50% of the country has heard of Gary Johnson, his favorables will probably be 25%. And if we're anywhere near 25% going into October, we're going to be extraordinarily dangerous, because that figure 3 months ago was 5%. And in the closing month of a political campaign, if you give me a choice of money, organization, and momentum, I will take momentum every time, and I'll be right.
If you have momentum right now, you're getting close to the 15%. If you don't get there, will you guys drop out?
Oh, no.
You're in it till November 8th.
We are in it to November, and I think there would be something of a national outrage if we are very, very close and don't get in, because people want to hear the alternatives. And in a way, it's a national issue here that people should not have it dictated to them that you have to choose the R or the D. That's like an antitrust monopoly.
In the CNN town hall, you said half of the big Republican donors have said they're not going to support Mr. Trump. That's a lot to work with. So how's the work going? Are you finding that people are opening up their pocketbooks?
They are. And again, this kind of shifted 2.5 weeks or so ago. And I was scratching, I'm doing the telephoning to the high-end donors, and I was scratching in the dirt to get $5,000 and $10,000 at a time 3 weeks ago. And then pretty suddenly, the 25s and the 50s start popping up. And the last 10 days, it's been 100, 50, 100, 250, and even 7 figures. Those are not to the campaign. That would be to a super PAC that I can't ask for, but it's still money.
Mm-hmm. What about getting support from some Republicans that maybe weren't at the convention in Cleveland, but are big names? Let's say President George W. Bush in 2004. You helped him. Helping you guys around?
I don't think I would ask him. Former president is a real institutional argument
for an endorsement. Nothing.
No.
What about Mitt Romney?
Mitt and Jeb I talk to with some frequency. Gary served with Jeb. We all know each other. I think probably the smartest thing for us to do now is concentrate on our knitting, do a lot of rallies around the country, which we're doing. We have 4 coming up this week in New England. Get ourselves better known, spend money ourselves on media, which we're going to be doing for the next 30 days, to influence the name recognition, which will influence our percentage, which will influence getting into the debates. But I think our chances are well over 50% of getting the debates right now. And when that gets close, I think you may see some more endorsements coming out.
Is there one endorsement that you would really love to have?
Oh, I'd love Jeb or Mitt, yeah.
And you guys are working on that?
Well, we're talking with them. I mean, we're all in the same business together.
And you were in the same party. Can you see yourself ever being a Republican again?
I can't go back. I sort of promised them in Orlando at the convention that I would stay libertarian. So I've made my bed and I'm going to lie on it.
All right. Governor Weld, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Good to talk with you. So what are your thoughts on the Johnson-Weld ticket? Let us know in the space below or on the Yahoo Finance Facebook page.